Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the world, the crazy world, that is, welcome to a brand new Vestiges After Dark. And I'm your host, Bishop Bryan Willett, coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains on this August 24th, 2021. Tonight we're talking about spiritual illness, but from the pagan perspective. We have a fantastic guest, a new guest to this show, an old friend of mine, an old co-host from our old podcasts, and we have a lot of history to go over, so maybe it's a little bit of a reunion show. Who knows? We'll see where it takes us. But first, answering your questions, so don't go away. Well, hello, everyone. I hope everyone is having a fantastic evening tonight. I am really excited about tonight's show, and I really think you're going to get a lot out of it. I think it's always important for us to explore all the different avenues that the metaphysical world provides in terms of, the nature of the paranormal, the metaphysical, the esoteric. They all sort of blend together, and the Christian esoteric tradition is not just is not the only way in which we experience this phenomenon. There's every religion in the world has its connection to those same basic principles. In my work I call it the perennial truth. You might have a different name for it, or maybe you didn't even know that there was so much of a connection between all these things, but you don't think these religions just spawned up spontaneously, with their own personalities, do you? I hope not. I hope you realize that every religion in the world essentially comes from that essential perennial truth. And so Vestiges After Dark deals with that perennial truth by exploring all of the various systems that have their own unique connection to that reality. So tonight we're deviating from perhaps some of the normal Christian dialogue, although I'm sure tonight if Father Chris decides to join us for the second half, he usually does. I'm sure he'll give us some insights and input into the subject matter. And that's always interesting to just see the dynamic unfold. I love that. And of course, in the second half of the show, we'll be taking your calls and questions. So you can log into the YouTube chat and watch us on YouTube. We're there right now. We're also on Twitter. We are on Facebook, both the brand new repurposed Esoteric Mysticism page on Facebook. It's now the Vestiges After Dark page. And then, of course, the public page for Esoteric, for the Exorcist Bishop. We're live on all of them right now, simulcasting. We're on Twitch as well and Daily Motion. But if you want to chat with us, the best place to come to chat would be on the YouTube channel. That's on the church's channel, and watch this feed directly there. And then you can engage the chat. Although our moderators are looking at all of the chat rooms. So if you have a question, they'll try to get it out to us, and Sister Mary Joan will pay attention to that because I can't. I've got all these other, all these lights and everything. It's kind of like a autistic nightmare, to be honest. But I'll try to get through this. We've gotten this is the third episode now with this new equipment. I think we're doing fairly well, and I didn't have any feedback tonight. That crazy distortion sound we had last week. I think we've fixed that problem, or at least if it happens, I know what to look for. But this is going to be, I think, an interesting episode for you. But before we even get started, I really want to go into the usual, taking questions for the week and the things that I get sent by email or on social media. And it's been kind of a hostile week on social media, so I won't go into too much of that. But there is one thing that I really wanted to address, and it's the question that came up a couple times, actually, and it's really more than just this week. It's something that we see all the time. Sister Mary Joan and I deal with it constantly, and I think it's really important for me to address it. So the question this week, it's not a specific question from any specific person. It's just a general question that keeps coming up. And it is when people come on either Twitter, usually social media, sometimes in the chat room to this show, or even when we're doing the live mass, they will start asking for help with what they believe is a demonic problem, and they want me to come and perform an exorcism. Okay, this is a thing that we get all the time. People asking, I live in this city. Can you come down and give me an exorcism? I live over here. I'm in this state. Can you come over and give me an exorcism? I'll come to you. I'll spend any amount of money you want. Give, whatever you want. Just tell me. I'll write you out a check. I need an exorcism. Folks, this is not how this works. I do not do exorcisms on demand. And honestly, since I have been on television, I have now hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of requests that come in all the time. I am one person in a very small, underfunded ministry, and I'm not going to take your money to run this ministry. If you want to donate to it, that's fine, but I'm not charging clients to utilize these services. That's called simony, and that's not a practice I'm in the habit of getting into as a bishop. So it's important for me to tell you all that what we are doing is we're trying to restructure the ministry in a way that can hopefully help more of you. It won't be me necessarily coming, but it will be people that might be able to help you and guide you through whatever resolution you may need for your particular spiritual problems. Okay, and it's not something that I'm trying. And somebody said, "Oh, well, you're so cold." No, I'm not cold. I'm not being cold. I'm being realistic. I can't do this. What would be cold is me saying, sure, I'll come and not show up, because that's what would happen if I said that. I can't show up. I don't have the resources to go to each and every one of these cases anymore. And we're being inundated, unfortunately, with a lot of mental health issues that people think are spiritual, or they're looking for a spiritual excuse, and they come to us hoping that we're going to wave our magical exorcist wands and it just all goes away. It doesn't work like that. There's a process to exorcism. There's a process to spiritual problem resolution. Spiritual problem resolution works in such a way that requires an entire team, a medical evaluation, okay, a psychological evaluation, as well as spiritual commitments. Okay, so the real important thing for everyone to know, if you think that you are having some kind of spiritual problem and you want me to work on it, what you need to do is you need to talk to your own pastor and proceed as your pastor would suggest. Because I'm not a way of circumventing your own pastoral life. I'm not a replacement for the Roman Catholic Church. I try to work in collaboration with the rest of the church, whether they be Roman Catholic or Protestant or otherwise. In fact, we deal with every potential religion. Honestly, I have a lot of Muslims who come to me for help. We get, atheists that sometimes come to us for help. They're obviously not going to have Christian parishes to go to. They're not going to have pastors that they can go to, but most of you do. And that's where you need to start. You don't just try to come to me, or worse, don't think that you can live your secular life, get into all sorts of spiritual problems, and then expect that I'm just going to come running to your doorstep next time that you need help. It does not work like that. I do not have the resources. I would love to be able to be that efficient. I wish I could be some kind of superhero. And I guess, when you're on TV, people think you're a superhero, but I don't have superhero powers. I am very mortal, and I am very limited to the same types of restrictions that all of you are limited to. So it's just like when you're trying to pay your bills at home and, trying to make ends meet. Well, this ministry tries to make ends meet. And when it reaches the point where it is stretched too thin, it has to cut back. And so what it has done is what I'm doing, and I've already kind of mentioned this before, but I wanted to mention it again because it's still coming up all the time. And I'm still getting emails and calls in the church's voicemail, and then, people going off topic on Twitter just to make sure that I see that they need help. I get it. You need help. You want help. You think you need help. But the fact of the matter is, that's not what I can do anymore. Okay. So going forward, I will be taking professional referrals when I'm ready to resume the work. Right now, we're not. We're on hold while we restructure. And I'm going to be training demonologists to be part of my team of professionals who are going to be evaluating this stuff. But going forward, okay, I'm not taking free cases from the public anymore, because I have wasted too much of the church's resources, taking cases that really ended up just being referrals to psychologists or medical doctors. And most of the time, that's what it's going to be, particularly if you already have a diagnosed condition. We're not going to give you an excuse to get off your medication. That's not what exorcism is, folks. Okay. And I don't do them on demand. All right. So you don't tell me that you need an exorcism and expect that I'm going to show up and you get all pissed off when I don't. Okay. That would be very unprofessional for me to do that. You are looking for expertise, I would imagine. So you're coming to me because you see me as sort of, I guess, the poster child of expertise in this area. All right. Well, that means that you need to trust my judgment. And my judgment is we need to exhaust the medical and the psychological and the emotional over and over and over again before we even consider this as a spiritual illness that needs to proceed to the stage of what would be eventually exorcism. Okay? Not trying to be mean. It's not about being cold. It's about being realistic and setting good expectations so that you knew how to proceed. All right? Most spiritual problems included, can be resolved with conventional therapies, which is a good lead-in for tonight. It's interesting that this happened because we're actually talking about that very thing tonight. And I think it's really just very important to understand this. And we're going to probably go into a lot of detail with this tonight. And I really think that a lot of you are going to get a lot out of it. I hope that some of you that are looking for help will be listening. And don't be disruptive in the chat room. Don't make the moderators have to block and silence you, okay? Please be respectful. There is just the resources are not there. Okay. This ministry gets about 5% of the revenue it needs to function. It's a miracle that I'm able to keep it going the way that I do and the way that I have. A lot of that is because I and the rest of us who work this ministry take out of our own pockets to keep it going sometimes. It's a crazy thing when you think about working a full-time and a half job and we're actually paying money to do that job for you. But that's the reality of this. So you need to respect that and understand that because otherwise there's nothing I can really do to help you any further if you can't. I mean, this is the process. This is the way it is. If you don't like it, well, help us fundraise. We've got Sister Mary Joan with us tonight. How are you doing, sister?
Good evening, everyone. Good to see everybody. And yeah, the Twitter applications for help got to stop. But we had one gentleman give out his personal phone number on Twitter this afternoon. Guys, don't do that. Yeah. Don't do that. You don't know who else is going to see that. And they can track you down by your phone number through open source on the internet. So just don't do that.
That's true. And, I mean, honestly, I know that I'm difficult to reach. Okay. And that's a bit by design, because if I made myself very, very available, which I used to, believe it or not, I used to keep my private chapel at my home open to the public. Okay. I used to let people come in. I used to have whole church functions here at my home.
And I never liked that, just to be clear.
I know you didn't. Well, you were
for security reasons.
You came into the ministry towards the latter half of that process.
Yeah, 2016.
And we had reached the point now where we were already getting the death threats, and I had to upgrade my entire security system to not only, put a wire on every single door and window and opening. Even the flue to the fireplace has a little sensor on it now. But I also,
tell anybody.
Yeah, don't tell anyone. But I have cameras everywhere in every single room now, because that's just how bad it used to get, where people would, threaten my life, the life of my family, because they did not like the solutions that I would come up with, which would basically mean get your ass in confession and, shape up. Let's straighten yourself out spiritually. Stop looking for excuses for your problems. Stop blaming demons and Satan for everything that you've done wrong in your life. That is not what exorcism's about. Okay. Exorcism is a completely different thing. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight. But more importantly, I think it's we're going to look at it from different perspectives. So tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing to you one of my good friends, somebody that has been in a part of my life, an instrumental part of my life for more than a decade, and part of that spiritual development in the early days of this ministry. She was there when this ministry was being founded. She could even probably, if she's willing, of course, she said that she's pleading the fifth, so who knows? But she can probably, if we're a little bit lucky, give you some reassurance that the things that I have shared over the years is absolutely true, that I'm not lying when I say that I was, yes, actually ordained and consecrated with valid apostolic succession. My bishop, it was her bishop back in the day. We were all part of the same church at the time. So she saw and was part of and witnessed and even signed her name to the part of the committee, I guess you could say. What else would we call it? A committee, a conglomeration? I don't know what we call it, of people from all different walks of life, from all different parts of the religious world, to create what now is called the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church. No, I didn't invent it. No, it was not my idea. No, I never wanted my own church. That had nothing at all to do with anything that I did. Okay. I was merely servicing a need, and this all grew around me. And then I was basically thrown half-ass backwards into it. And this is the result. So when people say that I created this church, well, they're full of shit. I did not. And Amanda tonight can tell you about this. But my guest is Amanda Morris. She is the Space Witch on Twitter. Okay, she is a social worker ordained.
Space Witch.
Yes.
I had to do it, guys. I had to do it.
She's a social worker, ordained minister, and high priestess who works and plays in the Triangle area of North Carolina. She can often be found leading rituals for the house church Gaia Circle, or enjoying conversation and cocktails with a regional networking group, the Triangle Area Pagan Alliance. Amanda has written on topics related to neo-paganism for a number of publications, both print and digital. In addition, she has represented workshops and lectures throughout the Southeast, including at Duke University Hospital and for the Polytheist and Pagan Educational Research Symposium. Musings and mutterings can be found on Twitter by looking up Word Morris on Twitter. So that's twitter.com/word, W-O-R-D, Morris, M-O-R-R-I-S. And I can tell you, she will give you great insights into all of the marvelous things that she does, and really a good friend of mine. So let's not hesitate any further to welcome Amanda Morris to the show. How are you doing tonight, Amanda?
Hey, Amanda.
I think you just, let's go ahead and unmute you again there. Okay, there we go.
Okay, sorry about that. I am at the end of a very long workday in an office waiting for coworkers to leave.
I see.
And when they leave, the internet will like free up whatever the internet is holding back. I don't know. So I apologize. My phone has a good connection if I need to, I'll back up on my phone. But hello, everyone. And Bryan, oh my God, it's so nice to see you.
Yes, it's nice to see you. We've it's been a long time since we've had a chance to really just kind of sit and talk and kind of just unwind from the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. For those of you who are kind of new to my work, if you followed me prior to Ghost Adventures, although a lot of you haven't, but if you followed me prior to Ghost Adventures, I've been podcasting for a very long time. I've said it before. I'm not lying when I say it. I've been podcasting before podcasting was a thing. I'm one of the first podcasters. We had an old show called Eye of the Seer that I did for many years, and then eventually, I just kind of fell out of practice, and it kind of went into a permanent or an indefinite, I should say, hiatus. And then I brought it back when I started working with Amanda. It's interesting that, we had a church. We were all part of the same church, and it was a Gnostic church at the time. I was exploring Gnosticism, and it was the Universal Church of Autogenes, and it had different schools. And we had a Christian school, which was the one that I ran, and Amanda ran the Hermetic school, which was sort of more of the magical neo-pagan school. But we had other schools, a Sethian school, I think. There was, it's been so long, I don't even remember them all. But we had some Christians, and they were the ones that were under me, and we had our own, rituals that we were a part of. And this was before I was a priest. I was just, I guess a metaphysical minister at this point. And then eventually I was ordained a priest. And that's when it started to change form. And that became sort of the beginnings of the Nicolaitan Catholic Church, because a lot of the Christians were not completely satisfied with the Gnostic editions. And it created a bit of a tension at the church that eventually, unfortunately, led to the church's dissolution, I think. Because there was just too many different perspectives, and people were not necessarily agreeable to working in that capacity. But what was so amazing about Amanda is that out of all of the people that were part of this, she was the one that she and I maintained our friendship through this, and we eventually went to work. We worked together on a new project that became known as esoteric mysticism. So my students who now study with me in the webinar know this well, because this is what we deal with on a fairly regular basis, is the components of esoteric mysticism. And I'm happy, because I know a lot of my students are listening tonight and will listen to the archive of this show later. But Amanda was my right hand person in this. I mean, she was my partner, and she was my colleague all the way through the development of what became esoteric mysticism. So I couldn't have done it without her. And I attribute that the quality of that friendship to the fact that she was able to look beyond all of the nonsense that was happening in the church at the time, and just preserve the friendship for the sake of the friendship, and that was what was wonderful about it. So she knows my perspective on paganism. I think it's a wonderful belief system. I don't have any problems with it whatsoever. We work with pagans sometimes in the work that I do. I know it makes Christians very uncomfortable, but you know what? It's like, grow up. You can be a little kindergarten Christian for the rest of your life, or you can grow up and be an educated, collegiate Christian. So let's try to aim for at least as close to that one as possible. And that means that you don't criticize other people's belief systems. That means that you make an effort to understand their belief systems. And, Amanda has always given me that benefit, in everything that she's done. But she comes from the Christian world. I mean, you didn't grow up a pagan witch, right, Amanda?
No, absolutely not. I grew up Southern Baptist. So Pastor Charlie instilled in me a sense of fire and brimstone at an early age. I was baptized in a Baptist church. I remember the ceremony. It was beautiful and meaningful. It was in high school, when, I was unfortunately part of a mega church fundamentalist church in high school. Ooh. And that's when, teenagers, part of human development is you start questioning authority and trying to figure out who you are and why. And I was like, this is not going to work for me.
Come on. I think if I had been in your shoes, I would have become a Satanist.
Frozen. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm going to switch to my phone.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
The screens will freeze up.
Yeah.
As long as you can hear us.
Okay, she's coming in. I think, yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and bring her in on the other. Here we
Stand
go.
by. There she is.
There she is. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, lady.
Oh, that's so much better. That is so much better.
Stay on the phone.
Like I said, I'm at the end of a long work day in my office. So, anyway, thank you for being patient with technology.
Oh, no problem.
But I left the church formally, when I was in high school. And I don't want to get Bryan on another soapbox about like politics and religion, but it was just too much. And it just was really not very Christ-like, and it was not very kind. And through misadventures and this and that, I tried to dabble in atheism, and that was just not going to click. Like, that was never going to be my life path.
Yeah.
But I dabbled in witchcraft off and on in high school and early college. But in 2005 is when I first was like, this is the thing I'm going to research for realsies. I was really lucky that I had friends who were in a coven, and I kind of worked with them for a year, and then did training with them, and then was dedicated and initiated. In 2009 was when I was ordained by the same bishop who, Bryan, I think you were ordained a few months before I was.
Yes.
And then after that, the rest is history. Like Bryan kind of summarized, I was there for all y'all haters out there. Like, I was there when Bryan was elevated to priesthood and then again to bishop. I know the person who laid hands on him physically, because that is the same person who laid hands on me when I was ordained. So like, I was there, I chanted with his friends and family and congregants. We broke bread together on a number of occasions. Bryan and I have shared, I'm not a whiskey drinker, unfortunately, or scotch or whatever it is your thing is. I remember one night when Bryan and I stayed up until like 4:00 in the morning drinking absinthe.
Oh yeah.
Like, deciding to this is the way we were going to hear something, right? So Bryan and I go way back, and I just have a lot of respect for his work and the ministry you guys are doing. I think it's amazing, and reaching a lot of people. And I'm honestly surprised at the patience that is still that you guys show all the time. Like, wow, like Bryan, you're one of the most patient people I know. And you're just very patient with some of the stuff that comes along your radar. Anyway, I'm done on my soapbox, but I was there. And so when you say he's a fake, you're talking out of your butt, because I was there, and I have pictures and anyway.
I mean, it's something that I think most of the criticism comes from the Roman Catholic Church. Unfortunately, you think that, they would be the ones that are the most understanding. They're actually the least. I don't know if you heard me before you had to switch to the other device, but I was saying if I had your upbringing in Christianity, I'd probably be a Satanist today. So I think you're doing pretty good. Honestly. But no, really, all kidding aside, no, I mean, it was a very serious conviction that that led all of us to develop the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church. And I mean, I don't consider myself as being its its founder. I was merely there at its birth, and I was given the custodial appointment, I guess you could say, to manage and administrate it and to care for it. But it offends me when I see people making things up, because now there's nothing I can do without some blog or some individual somewhere making a whole post about it with this yellow journalistic tone that, basically comes up with maybe about 5 or 10% fact that they can extrapolate, and then the rest of it they make up, and they weave the facts into their lies just enough to make it convincingly true, even though it's completely false. And one of those things, of course, was that I was that I ordained myself. That was one. I think you were there. You saw that did not happen. As well as I do that Mansell Christian Gilmore, was a fully consecrated bishop with apostolic succession, and had a very long, also spiritual commitment in that work, and a person that really shaped who I am today. So honestly, it's offensive because none of you were around back then, because you didn't know who I was back then. Now I'm on TV. You think you can just make up anything you want about me. But there's real history there, even though there's a lot of people that are lying. And Amanda was there. So, I wanted to get that out because I know that's a topic that comes up a lot. And, Amanda being such an intrinsic part of that history, I can't help but talk about it. But more importantly, the subject tonight is spiritual problem resolution. And so, what I do, Amanda, I know that we've talked a little bit. You had some cases that you even referred over to me over the years, or little things that you wanted my opinion on. So I know that you do encounter this. You do see this as both a pagan witch and leader of your own ministerial group, and then also as a therapist. I would imagine that sometimes you see cases that you might feel are more spiritually motivated problems, and I would imagine that maybe that's difficult for you to actually, have to be secular in that capacity when you already have such a deep spiritual grounding. So I'm curious, to start this whole thing off tonight, what have you seen, and in the different contexts, whether it be through your work as a pagan leader or as a psychotherapist or social worker. How do you deal with these things when you encounter them?
Such a great question. That is so loaded. So I'll talk professionally first because, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm mostly work with children, but I do work with adults, young adults, people of all ages. And when I am Miss Amanda, right, my work role, I am social worker Amanda, right? I am a professional in social work school. And I think other types of clinicians get this type of training too, but in social work school, we talk about the multidimensional approach to the human. And we try to recognize there's the bio, which is the person's physical body, the psychological aspect, the social aspect, bio, psycho, social, spiritual, four parts of the person. So bio, psycho, social, spiritual, and that spiritual component is vital. It's so important. And clinicians, and when I say clinician, I mean psychiatrist, social worker, marriage and family counselor, psychologist, anyone who works in the mental health field with a license and a degree. We just kind of don't know what to do with the social aspect. And I think that's okay. Sometimes it really does our clients a disservice. But a clinician doesn't really have spiritual training. And there's some pastoral counselors. In the state of North Carolina, the pastoral counseling license is really, really hard to get and takes a long time.
Does it really? Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I thought about getting one just to add another letters behind my name, but it's not worth it.
Yeah.
It would give me letters behind my name, basically.
Yeah.
And so like clinicians really shouldn't speak to clients about spiritual matters, because that is not our training. However, it is our job when a client talks to us about spiritual matters to what we call like meet the client where they are. And so I have Catholic clients that when they talk about the things that are important to them as Catholics, my job is to meet them where they are and lift that up. Like religion, my take on it is religion and spirituality is vital to humans. We're just hardwired for it. I could rant about the neurobiology of ritual and religion, and I'm not going to right now because that's a whole other lecture.
We'll do another episode with you on that.
But we are hardwired for this stuff.
I agree.
And energetically, it's just part of us. So since I am a pagan community leader, when I do get pagans who come into my office, I usually have a conversation very first thing, and I say, I'm a leader in this community. If you see Amanda out in the wild, like High Priestess Amanda out in the wild, we're going to have to navigate that, right? Like if I am in my office, I am not your High Priestess, I'm your therapist. When you're in my circle, I am not your therapist. I am your priestess, and that is a very, very different role. So I ethically and for my own personal boundaries, I have to navigate that a lot, to the point where a lot of folks in my community could really use a good therapist who is educated in paganism, who's friendly with paganism, who's non-judgmental. There's just not a lot of us out there. There's not a lot of pagan therapists out there. And it's caused some tension in my community when people want me, or they feel like they need me to overstep. Well, they don't see it as overstepping. But they want me to switch those hats, and I ethically can't. Like it's in my code of ethics, and personally, I can't. I just don't have the emotional and mental and energetic capacity for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So professionally, so at your original question about what have I seen, I don't work with a lot of pagans professionally, but I do have people who come in, and I think what we say in the South is, wow, we all need Jesus. You need something, a little something.
Yeah.
I do know someone who's at one of our local universities. I live in the Triangle area. We have a ton of universities, who's a psychiatrist. And when clients come to her office who she cannot help or who need that little extra something, she refers out to a local high priestess to do pastoral counseling or spiritual mentoring with, or like legally life coaching, but it's really in the realm of pastoral counseling or spiritual mentoring.
Right.
And I think that's very humble, is when you as a clinician know you can't do something to find someone who can. I think that's really important. And even me as a high priestess, when I have people who come to me for mental health stuff, I make sure they're not in crisis mode. And then once we make sure they're not in crisis mode, I will do everything I can to help them find a therapist. I do a lot of referrals, a lot of referrals, just because it's hard for people to navigate. They don't know. I mean, we live in the South. To be openly a witch in the South is quite a privilege that I have. Not everyone can do that.
Right.
Especially if they have children or if they have like state or federal jobs. So in the pagan role, I kind of act as like a gatekeeper. I don't want to say gatekeeper, but like a middleman for helping people find people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of on the logistics end. What have I seen as far as like spiritual illness? Boy, there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there.
I'm sure.
I see what comes across publicly on your Twitter stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm seeing the public stuff. I'm not seeing the private stuff. I get those same types of emails, but not as often because I'm not public like you guys are. Like, I have not been on TV so no one knows to find me unless you're local. And man, I don't know. What have I seen? My mind's kind of spinning because I don't want to be like gossipy and telling stories.
No, sure. Yeah. Be general, I guess, is, just kind of like, I guess, the general idea as to what kinds of things you might have encountered. Well, let me ask you this. Let's make it a little bit, let's narrow it down. Have you seen anything that might invoke your impression or perception of what you might suspect to be demonic possession?
Yeah. When I was an intern, I interned at a psychiatric hospital on the male adolescent unit. I don't work with psychosis right now. I don't work with like really heavy mental illness. I'm like work with like sad, anxious kids, right? I'm still serious for these people. But when I was in the hospital, I did see psychosis. I saw schizophrenia. I saw mania. I saw like all of those scary things that the media shows you. In fairness to the hospital is a very safe place. This is where these people and kids needed to be. But one thing that really still really lives with me and I carry with me is this kid who would, was probably about 16 or 17 and had smoked some marijuana. And this is not a place for morality about marijuana. My concern is teenagers should not be smoking it because it is not good for their brains. Your brain's not developed. You have to wait till your brain's done cooking because marijuana can induce psychosis in people who have a predisposition towards psychosis or schizophrenia. And this,
I'm glad you said that. I just want to say, if I may interject, it's very important that you said that because that's a question I get a lot. I'm very open. I mean, CBD oil, which is not really marijuana, but I mean, it's got a very small amount of THC, but it's completely like healed a 3-decade-old chronic migraine condition. It's a wonderful thing. But I think sometimes people think that it's like got this impression that it's a perfectly safe drug. There's no harm that can come. And it's like, well, yeah, under certain types of situations. And I'm glad you mentioned that about the developing brain, because I think a lot of people ignore that or don't recognize that or don't want to acknowledge that. So thank you for mentioning that.
To me, cannabis is a medicine. It's a plant medicine. It's an ancient plant spirit medicine. Mm-hmm. Not all medicines are good. I should not be on epilepsy medication. I don't have epilepsy, right?
Right.
And adolescents gotta wait until you're like 25, and then I don't care, right? And so, what I've seen, unfortunately, in the hospital is a lot of kids who had schizophrenia onset from cannabis use. Mm-hmm. And I had this one client or patient who's hospitalized, who sometimes would drift in and out of lucid moments. And you can kind of tell, this is one of those things that like experience is really important because you can tell when someone is there and when they're not. And I wish there was a way I could describe it. It's just, you just know. And the thing in our brains are wired for this. Our empathic nervous systems are wired to know if this is safe or not. Is this safe for the other person? Is this safe for me? And this kid, like I said, he really will weigh on my heart forever. Talking about how when he looked in the mirror, and this is about the time the psychosis onset, he had demons telling himself that what he said was, it said it was an angel, but I know it was a demon because it told me to kill myself, and God would never tell me to kill myself.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is a moment of lucidness. And of course, like 5 minutes later, this kid is not there anymore.
Right.
And that story just really struck with me about like when you have those ideas of what is the difference between one thing or another. God wouldn't tell you to kill yourself.
I don't think many gods would they?
No. And that was just something that I saw that I was like, this is different. This is different.
Yeah.
I have, in my role as priestess, I've seen a lot of mental illness, and I would say it's untreated depression, untreated anxiety, untreated ADHD. And when I say untreated, I don't just mean unmedicated, and sometimes that's the case. It's like you have to have basic life skills of, are you sleeping regular hours? Are you drinking enough water? Do you eat enough protein? Like basic self-care.
Yeah.
But there's something about the neo-pagan community that we attract outsiders. We're a place where everyone can come. We don't have a main book. We don't have a main liturgy. We don't have any main leaders. Like, my high priestessness is not recognized by every high priestess.
Yes.
Like, not the way it is. And we tend to attract a lot of people who are othered, who don't fit in. And that could be people who just don't fit in with mainstream religion, people who are LGBT, people who, there's a lot of folks with autism in the pagan community. That just for some reason it clicks a little more. And unfortunately, we get a lot of folks with untreated, undiagnosed mental illness. And when you are doing things like ancestor worship, divination, perhaps taking in herbs that might give you a slightly altered state, including like wine or mugwort tea, right? When I have a direct relationship with my deities who sometimes visit me in my dreams and give me messages, like, we're already kind of like living on the fringes of what is seen as like healthy, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And so it's very common for someone to say like, oh, I just spoke to my deity last night, or I had this vision, or my grandma came to speak with me. But every once in a while you get someone who, when they say, I had this up close relationship with such and such deity, and then they start talking about it and you're like, wait a minute, this is very different, right?
Right. Like,
very, very different. And we are in a religion where you have a personal relationship with your deities, and it's really encouraged. Like, I'm a polytheist. There's many deities who I work with and who I have different types of relationships with, but I don't go drinking as much as I'd like to. I don't go drinking with Dionysus every night on the astral plane in Stonehenge, right?
I do, but I mean, that's me.
Right behind you.
Right? And so I could have a meditation or a trance or a journey where this is the message that comes to me. I could have that type of like cognitive experience, but I am not literally Amanda, who's a physical human, doing that every night.
Yeah.
And you get people who really, really think they are. And that can confuse newcomers, and it scares newcomers. I feel like most of the old timers have seen it enough that you just don't take it seriously. But I've had a lot of moments where people have pulled me aside and have said, is so-and-so okay? And it's like, I am not so-and-so's therapist, but like, I without me like overstepping to validate, I know what you are telling me right now. I am not your therapist, but I'm recognizing what you are recognizing.
Right.
There are instances where, okay, I'm going to use an example, Bryan, if this is okay.
Yeah.
Someone who is in the community, who was speaking of possession. And so some disclaimer, some like background, in neo-pagan practices, especially, or other occult or mystic practices, there's this concept of horsing or being ridden. It's really common in Afro-Caribbean diasporic religion.
Mm-hmm.
Korea, voodoo, like Caribbean traditions. And then you see it some in like Norse or Scandinavian, like heathen traditions, where they might call it a possession, but like horsing or riding is kind of the term, or aspecting, or in Wicca, it's called drawing down the moon, where you do a complex ritual with safety precautions in like consensual like decision making on what's going to happen, where a deity might come into you. We have people in town who do oracular work. They're oracles. They speak with the voice. Listen, until you have someone speak with you with the voice of Odin, you've never lived, right? Like that is a humbling, energetic experience.
Yeah.
But this is set within a ritual parameter where the person can do the proper offerings and ritual to take on Odin and then do the oracle thing. This is an ancient tradition. This is thousands of years old with people doing ritualistic, like communion with the deity. This does not happen to just anyone. I am a high priestess, fully initiated. I can't do any more than what I have done as far as like ranks or degree. And I have never done this. I mean, I'm not good at it, but I've never done it. I kind of don't want to. It's not my jam, right? Like if you looked at my like resume, my witchy CV, I could do it. I'm just not going to. This is not a thing that just happens to people. And so every once in a while you get someone who says, oh, I've been possessed by so-and-so. And so I had a case where someone was loudly proclaiming all over social media, posting videos of themselves, of their experiences. And it was chilling because I know this person very well. And of course I was worried because when anyone says they're possessed and then they name a deity by name, it's not even a deity, like name a spirit by name.
Yeah.
Especially this name that was dropped. I was already worried. And then watching these videos, it reminded me of when I was in the hospital. There's very few times when I'm like, this is something different. Yeah. This isn't someone who is faking, because sometimes we get fakers. This isn't someone who is like cosplaying or taking it too far. This is something, and it chilled me. And I watched the video, and it made me sick to my stomach. And I think that's a really good sign of when something energetically is bad, because your body knows, your nervous system responds, and it makes you sick. You've talked a lot about your headaches that you get, Bryan, when you're doing the work you do.
Yeah.
For me, I get really nauseated when I'm around the bad energy. And it made me sick. And then I had nightmares, right? Because it was so disturbing. And so this is one of those moments when I knew this person had a therapist. I knew they were on medication. I knew they were going through a lot of stuff. And I was like, this is different. So I messaged Bryan and I sent him the video. And I was like, please confirm for me that I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing. Am I just buying into this? Am I over exaggerating? And Bryan was like, no, this is like textbook looking like the thing, right?
Yeah, it was very textbook. Yeah.
And then we talked about like, you're very clear about this is the protocol, contact, this is the list, like this is how these are the next steps to take. And of course, unfortunately, this person did not want to take the steps, right?
Yeah. Which is very typical.
Yeah, they're usually far gone at that point.
That's why I keep telling people when they're like going out of their way on social media or calling the church every hour of the night and saying, I need an exorcism. That's the surefire sign that you don't.
Yeah,
because
no sugar britches. You don't need an exorcism.
I have never encountered a genuine case where the person really wanted me involved in their situation. They usually want to get as far away from me as possible. So anytime somebody says, I need an exorcism, that's always my best clue that they don't. It's kind of what you're describing there, where, they have these problems, but they don't want to proceed with the types of things that are necessary for resolution, which do not necessarily mean having to go through the rites of, Christian baptism or something. I mean, there's many different methodologies that can remove the invading consciousness from the person's mind. It turns out, in my experience, Catholic exorcism is the most effective, but that's not the only one. I mean, Judaism has it, Islam has it, Buddhism has it. There's a variation of it in the many different schools of Hinduism, and likewise, as you talked about, the Afro-Caribbean cultures and shamanic cultures have already protocols for how to deal with this when a particular spirit goes a little too far. So it's well known for those of us who work in this area. Of course, to the outside looking in, it looks like we're just a bunch of superstitious morons.
Well, I think there's just, when it comes to the work, like the great work, right? Which is what we call it in like occult or esoteric communities, the great work. It opens you up to a lot of stuff. You got to be careful. You got to take it slow. Some people, it sounds thrilling. Oh, I'm going to be visited by this like ancient sexy goddess who's going to like give me great orgasms. And it's like, I don't think that's really what you want.
No,
right?
No, you don't.
And in a religion that doesn't really have like a lot of oversight or a lot of accountability. I was talking earlier about like, I try really hard to stay in my lane. Am I therapist Amanda? Am I priestess Amanda? These roles do not cross for ethical and legal and personal reasons and religious reasons too. I would upset some deities who are like, you know better than that.
Sure.
Not all of my peers can admit that, right? Like there's a lot of pagan clergy out there with various trainings and various backgrounds who really overstep on the mental health stuff. I have some peers who I love and they do great community work, but they were asking me, they're like, how do we get more training on mental illness? And I was like, you do not, unless you go to school and you get a degree. Your job as a clergy person is to refer out. And they got really mad about that. And it's like, we can do a lot more harm than good. Like Bryan, like if you had a Baptist preacher who is going to do an exorcism, they have zero experience or background or training in that. Like that is them not staying in their lane. You have very specialized training. Both of y'all have very specialized training. And I think it's just really important for clergy of any type to know we need to collaborate with other professionals on this. And so I am not an exorcist. I did not try to exorcise this person.
Yeah.
I messaged my exorcist and said, can you consult with me as a peer on this? Right. Mm-hmm. I've had other types of friends who do like hypnotherapy or past life regression who have consulted with me and said, this thing's coming up. Does this seem like mental illness or is this something else? And then we work together as peers with a lot of training experience to say, I think this is something else. Please refer them out to a therapist. Or, no, I think this is within the realm of like spiritual stuff. And like, and I just think it takes a lot of, I don't know, self-control, humility, training, experience to be able to say like, it's not my job as a high priestess to do that type of work. And it's not my job as a therapist to do that type of work. Like and that's the thing I do think about with some of my clients is every once in a while, someone will say something and it kind of clicks in my brain of, okay, you are consistently hearing this voice. You're consistently having these types of nightmares. The thing you're telling me about, here's a great example. Teenage girls, right? And poltergeist activity.
Oh yeah. That's a good
we
one.
see that a lot.
Yeah. And when the teenage girl tells you, okay, so just for your listeners who might not know, do either of you want to speak on what poltergeist activity and teenager girls have in common?
Well, yeah, I mean, the poltergeist phenomenon, I mean, I think the movie kind of throws a wrench into that because I think people see that movie and think that must be what poltergeist activity is. And even though the movie does feature poltergeist activity, it really kind of goes off on a strange tangent with the, I guess, the incarnation of the spiritual realm and the bilocations. And then, of course, all of the graves at the end, popping up. Most of the time, poltergeist activity, which is basically an energetic environment where things can move around by themselves, or there's types of paranormal disturbances that cannot be easily explained, that could be very upsetting to the people who live in the home. And it looks like it's some kind of extreme, very angry spirit activity, when in fact what it is some kind of telekinetic effect that seems to be related to adolescence and the types of, I guess, hormonal energies that adolescent boys and girls naturally produce. And it seems to have some kind of incorporeal effect that just science isn't ready to acknowledge or recognize, or doesn't even know how to study it, so it just sort of ignores it. But that's essentially where I think you're going with it. So I mean, feel free to elaborate if there's something I'm missing.
No, absolutely. That's I knew you'd give me a very succinct textbook. So I'll be in my office, and clients will talk about weird things, and these kids think they're going crazy, and parents dismiss it because it makes parents uncomfortable. Can't tell peers. With this type of thing, kind of the more you fight it, the more it happens. I've seen this firsthand with my own family, with my sisters who are very energetically gifted. And it scared them a lot. It's scary. And so just the bravery of a teenage kid to be like, and all these weird things happened, like stuff fell, the door slammed. I had sleep paralysis, right? Where you fall asleep, or your body's asleep, but your mind is woken up. And then weird, scary stuff can happen. And it's weird for me to kind of hear these things and be like, oh, I suspect this is, like you said, the telekinetic abilities, because teenage hormones are bonkers. We have no peer-reviewed articles about this, right?
No, it's crazy.
Like well-known secret that no one talks about. And to have these kids like talk about it in therapy sessions. And I do validate, without diving too much into but basically what I do in those moments is like, what can we do for self-care to help calm your nervous system, to soothe you? If you're soothed, these things are less likely to happen. And it looks like I'm saying, like, here's how you cope with scary things, which is true. But really, it's like, how do we soothe your nervous system? Like, get you regulated. This problem's very likely going to solve itself. When the times I've had to tell kids, no, it's not a demon, right? Yeah. Like, the thing you're talking about is not a demon.
Well, that's what they're conditioned to think.
Yeah. Well, and in the Western culture, it's very common that when scary stuff happens, that we immediately think demonic bad. Right. When it comes to some of these things in other cultures and more indigenous or Eastern cultures, the weird stuff that happens is like family coming to visit you and give blessings. It's nature spirits. It's angels. But for us, maybe we watch.
It's gotta be the devil.
Yeah, it's the devil. The devil at the time. It's Lilith. It's Lucifer. It's the devil every time. And it's not. It's just not. And I don't want to say people don't have experiences, because they do, and they're scary, right? Like, our brain the brain is just this, it's such a weird machine of like electricity and fat. Our brain is not really good at discerning what's real. Like, there's not like an objective reality. I mean, mysticism backs this up. There's not an objective reality. We are having these experiences and then processing them with like a very outdated, faulty piece of hardware. Yeah. Is easily tricked. Like, cognitive distortions happen all the time, where we think something is true or real, and it really is just our distortion of how our brain is processing. People who have dyslexia, this happens all the time, right? Where your brain just kind of fills in these gaps. And when that happens, that can be really scary. We think it's real. If anyone's ever had a dream where their partner cheated on them and then they wake up mad, your brain is responding as if that actually happened. You can tell your brain all day, every day, it was just a dream, but your chemical reaction has already happened. Yeah. And then you're just reacting to the chemicals at that point.
I think there's also, at least on a metaphysical level, there's already a certain aspect to that where there is reality to it. It's not just simply something that is the illusions of the mind, but there's actually something real to it. We're talking with Amanda Morris about spiritual problem resolution from the pagan perspective and her work as a therapist. We have another hour to go, maybe more. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this short break.
Just like a spark that's breaking out. Can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No, we can't turn back now. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up. Tonight, we gonna light it up, baby. Tonight, we gonna light it up. Just like the sunrise, we gonna light it up.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second half of Vestiges After Dark. We are talking with Amanda Morris, a good friend of mine, old co-host and therapist, as well as a pagan leader. And she gives us insights into what she's seen in terms of how spiritual illness can infect anyone at any time. We'll be talking more about that this second half, and we also are joined by Father Chris Yates in Australia. Yes. How are you? All right. We'll be back in just a moment. Don't go away. Well, thank you everyone for staying through the break. I hope you enjoyed that little musical opportunity to go to the restroom, get some drinks, maybe pour yourself a new beverage. I ran out of wine a little while ago, so I'll make it to the scotch later this evening, so it's not a big deal for me. But we're having a fantastic discussion with Amanda about her work and the things that she has experienced and some of the challenges, I guess, of working in a more metaphysical, hands-on kind of spiritual practice. And paganism, I think, Amanda, would be the natural challenges to it is that, and I tell people this all the time, Christianity is mostly safe. It's not completely safe. I mean, there's always going to be elements to it that call to us, and particularly the more mystical aspects that call to us and result in, I think, some of the need to be even more, I don't know how to put it, even more, just more in tune, because it just sort of compels us to reach further than maybe our comfort zones would allow. But outside of that, paganism as a ritual practice with its own sort of liturgical flavor really does focus in on some of these elements that can sort of toe the line of spiritual danger. So, I think you kind of touched on that a little bit. Christianity is not, there's communion with God, of course, like we have communion, we have the Eucharist. But Jesus Christ is a very safe archetype in that respect. But paganism might reach into other areas of the cosmic ether that might be for a particular purpose, that they're trying to, draw more power for a particular issue that they're trying to deal with in their life. And maybe they could even get it wrong or offend the deity, and that could lead to other types of issues, that something that a Christian would not necessarily encounter in the same way. So what do you think about that? Do you find that there's some truth to what I'm saying, in the sense that there's more of an inherent risk because naturally you have a larger gamut to work with than we do? What are your thoughts on that?
I really, really super agree with you. One example in my disclaimers, I'm not trying to offend anyone, any deities or any practitioners. So the Norse god Loki is enjoying a moment in the spotlight right now.
Oh, yes, definitely.
He's really, really popular. However you come to pagan, people come to this stuff by many means. But like Marvel in the MCU, franchise, Loki is a character. I don't really like Marvel stuff, and so I don't really know. I can't speak to that character, but he's a character. And people are like, "Oh, I heard that he's a real god, so I'm going to start worshiping him." And then when I've seen this. If I had $1 for every time I have seen this, then I could do whatever the thing is that people do with a lot of money. I don't know. I'm a social worker. A social worker and a priestess. You're an exorcist. We're not in the business for money.
No,
right?
you don't get rich in this work. I mean, even if you're on television, it makes no difference.
So, I've seen over and over again that folks start a relationship with Loki. And this is the type of thing, I do not work with Loki and I won't. But this is the type of thing that I know Loki loves. So they start a relationship with Loki, and then suddenly their life turns upside down and they wonder, where did my money go? Why are my relationships wonky? Why is everyone dramatic around me? Why do I feel manic all the time? Clinically manic all the time. Well, Loki is a Jotun. He's part giant, who are the forces of chaotic nature in Norse myth. He is a Jotun. He is a trickster deity, and he is not a nice guy. Loki is not a kind fella. He's not warm, fuzzy. I don't know who's a warm, fuzzy guy. He's not like Ganesh, right?
Yeah, Ganesh is kind of warm and fuzzy. That's true.
like, so I see people who align themselves with these energies and then wonder, why is my life so like this? And then I wonder, did you not read the myths, the source materials, right? Like, it is literally spelled out in there where Loki, in one of the Norse Eddas, these epics, he goes to a dinner party and systematically insults every single guest at this dinner party, which is rude and also in violation of like the sacred act of guest-host relationship, right? Like, if I'm a guest in your home, I honor you as my host. You honor me as a guest. And he goes and insults them to the point where the other gods go and try to murder him because he's so awful. Like, I think at one point Freya is like, you need to shut up now because you're about to get in some trouble. And so what I see, and this is an example that I see a lot, where people work with deities and then they wonder why their lives are like those deities. And I'm going to dip a little into your esoteric mysticism, right?
Of course, yeah, definitely.
These are archetypes that if you align yourself with the archetype, you're aligning yourself with that energy and that power. This is going to impact your lives. And I see this with pagans, and I see this with clients who align themselves with certain archetypal energies and then wonder why things are so hard or why their lives are going to shit. And that's maybe not kind for me to say, but like,
it's true though.
Wonder, when we align ourselves with anything, with any archetype, it's not like they're like black and white, good or bad. It's just an energy that will use us and work through us. And some people, those with training and self-knowledge and like clerical training, like I'm a high priestess. Part of my training is to work with these archetypes in a ritualized setting. Part of your training as a bishop is the same. When I am Miss Amanda in my office chair, I am a certain persona who is working with these energies in a certain way. And I do have deities who I use to help me with this clinical process, who help me be a good clinician. But also those deities have a place, right? And that's not something you're going to see in Christianity as much. I mean, maybe you have people who become overly attached to like John the Baptist, right?
Right.
But I feel like there's like,
or the saints. I mean, I think honestly, all of the communion of saints, I think sometimes very traditional Catholics can sometimes maybe fall into the trap of putting too much importance on them. And they align too closely to certain ones. And then, of course, it doesn't really have the same kind of deleterious effects on their life that you're talking about, because again, there's only so much harm that can come from being emulating a saint too closely, even archetypally. But at the same time, it's still not necessarily a desired approach to what you're trying to achieve spiritually.
In the office, okay, I'm going to give an aside, and I promise it's related. In Ireland, and I don't know if this is contemporary, if this is like a folk magic saying, but you would never ever say, I am anxious. You would say, I deal with anxiety. You would never say, I am depressed, right? Because in that...
Giving yourself a name.
You are giving yourself, you're labeling it, you're giving yourself a name. I say, I am anxious, I am naming myself anxious.
Right.
Well, they normally give they say I've got the cold rather than I have a cold, or so there's it's partly it's partly linguistic, but then it's very hard to. Sorry, my family are Irish. So, it's hard to separate the linguistic from the philosophy, because of course the one is connected to the other. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, and energetically, if you're labeling yourself, then you become attached to those labels. If we apply that to psychotherapy, one of the very basic foundational therapies that every intro level therapist is going to learn is something called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. What we teach is, can we reframe your narrative? right? How can we shift how you talk about yourself and to yourself and about your world to give yourself more power over it or more authority over it? So you are not anxious. You're a person who sometimes deals with anxiety, right? Or however you want to reframe it. To me as a witch, that is the power of language and the power of energy. For me as a dabbling mystic, that is aligning to archetypes, the archetype of capital A anxiety, that's a presence. Anyone who's dealt with depression, capital D depression is a presence in your life, right? Yeah. That is a chemical thing in your brain. But when you are in that moment, depression is like a person who is beating you up constantly, or laying on you, or whatever it is, however you feel that in your.
Do you think there's a kind of wider philosophical issue here, I think, which is that, and it doesn't matter actually whether one is, a scientismist, if you understand what I mean by that, rather than somebody that follows the scientific method, a scientismist, atheist, materialist,
a lot of that now,
or conversely, a very religious or mystical person, is that the spirit of the age for a long time, certainly the whole of the 20th century, I think onwards, has been one of looking for a cure outside. So either, the body is a machine and the brain's a machine, and we just need to find the right chemical to ingest or the right surgical procedure to fix us from the outside, or conversely, within a more mystical tradition, the right god or the right exorcist or whatever it may be to come in and fix us. And actually, it's very, very passive. And so this passivity has become, endemic. That is truly
no one wants to
Western
work on
pandemic.
Their own. No one
because actually it's much harder work to say, right, oh, maybe I suck, or maybe I'm thinking, maybe I think in a wrong way.
Yeah, maybe let me work on me. But no, today it's all, what can you do for me? I haven't done anything wrong. This person, that person, society did this to me.
Yeah. And this can be skewed.
Need to work on me. You fix me.
Well, it's a type of scapegoating, is what it is.
And it can be skewed in Christianity too. So I'm not picking on anybody here. Within Christianity, it's that St. Michael needs to fix my spiritual anxiety, or rather than it's a and like Bishop Bryan was saying, an over fixation on the saints is actually a distraction from the core Christian message, which is to say we are sinful. And we're sinners, and in fact, we need to work on that. Me included, of course, more than any. We need to work on that inner, not inner healing, that inner awareness of who we are, that we truly are the created, wonderful reflection of the divine principle.
Yeah, the true awakening.
But then actually, the stuff that gets in the way, we can do something about in as much as we can be aware of it and confess it, and not let it become who we are. Like you just said in therapy, you say, well, you've got this message saying I am X, and X is a bad thing. It'd be much better to say sometimes I do X, but it's so passive. I heard an interview with Matthew Perry, from Friends. And he was supporting these drug courts. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but he was basically arguing against self-will. He was, because the converse argument coming from Peter Hitchens was, no, people are in control of what they do, and they need to sort themselves out. And part of helping sort people out is actually they get convicted, and then that's a bit of a slap in the face. They've got to wake up. So so I wonder what as both as a therapist and as what you do in your religious practice, what you think about that.
That is complex, and different therapists with different modalities would give you a different answer. I would say both, and I think there's a place for both. And leaning into one perspective or the other, I think can be harmful. We know clinically, peer-reviewed science articles, that folks with what we call a high, an internal locus of control often just feel better and have lower rates of mental illness. And what that means is someone who thinks that they are in control of their world, right? I'm not having a bad day because Mercury's in retrograde. right? Like everyone has Mercury plus, right?
Yeah.
I'm just having a bad day, and Mercury's in retrograde, which might influence some of these situations. But like, I'm just going to have a bad day because a bad day happens. I lost my book report, not because Mercury's in retrograde, which might influence the losing of electronics, but because I didn't save it and back it up. Right. And so that's kind of that both and of like, things can influence the situation, but also like, we have to have an internal locus of control. We have to have personal responsibility. And in my office and in magically, to me, that boils down to doing the work of self-knowledge, which is hard and scary and painful, and it sucks. Like, self-knowledge is not fun. Looking at ourselves into our shadows and our darkness is upsetting. We don't want to think that we have the capacity for these things. But
that's why people phone up Bishop Bryan and say, come and, wave a magic wand and make me well.
Right.
I'm Gandalf. I mean, I am
more appealing.
I am Gandalf the Grey. I've got my staff and my magic wand. I come in there, I fix everything instantaneously. You don't even have to think. You don't have to work. It's that great. No, not at all. We're going to be taking calls here. The number to call if you have a question for one of our guests, or just a general thought or comment about tonight's topic. You can call us at 347-338-1860. That's 347-338-1860. Once you enter into the switchboard, it'll ask you for a PIN number. That's 110-0999. 110-0999. That's up on the screen right now. I'm calling in right now from the 615 area code over there. I think it's Tennessee.
That's Tennessee.
Yeah, it's usually Tennessee. Yeah. But hello, you're on the air.
No, it's not Tennessee. It's Colorado.
It's Joy Keeling from Colorado with her crazy Tennessee number, because she just can't give up the South. You see.
I thought Tennessee
too. Yeah. Oh gosh, I wanted to call in because there are so many things, of course, that kind of really connected to me. Like at the very beginning when you were talking about. I see all these people coming to you on social media trying to get you to do this stuff. And it's like, I was your student. And, like back then at the very beginning in 2017, we could message you we could DM you on Facebook. Of course, now you're not even on Facebook, but back then we could just talk to you.
Yeah.
And I still had to fill out the form. There's a procedure for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
all that stuff is archived.
Nobody's an exception. Yeah, there's no such thing as an exception here. And it's for their protection as well as, yours, as well as mine. That way it keeps everything in one spot and it's all private, and only the people who are dealing with it need to see it. And that's how it's supposed to be. In fact, that's some of the stuff that we learned when of course, a lot of people don't remember back in the beginning when I was your co-host and I introduced myself. I've been working on a Master of Divinity for quite a while. I'm very close to finishing, but my illness has kind of stopped me. So I had to deal with all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things we learned, is I took several classes on pastoral care and counseling. And the thing they teach you is meet with these people 2 or 3 times to figure out what the issue actually is, and then refer them to the appropriate help.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was a very big thing, because they stressed you're not going to be able to help this person as much as this, because odds are it's not going to be a very spiritual issue. It's going to be psychological, and they're going to need therapy.
Yeah.
Right.
So make sure, you have a list of counselors to work with. Make sure you have places you can refer them, people you have, relationships with out in the community that deal with, social work and counseling, people who are licensed. Because you're not going to be licensed in that. You're not going to be licensed in pastoral care because it's really difficult.
Yeah, right.
You're going to be
Joy, can I come in on that? I'm sorry to butt in, but I just want to really heatedly agree with you. And one thing that really irritates me is clergy think that somehow when they're ordained, it gives them a therapy qualification. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that can be very dangerous. I've seen some real bad pop psychology, well-meaning, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I really agree with that. And I just want to caution, if there are clergy listening to this, unless you do some kind of qualification, further education, unless you're under supervision as somebody who is a therapist, please don't try and mess with people's psychology. Spiritual guidance is not the same thing as therapy.
Right. This specialized training comes in big time. Now, Father H, as police officers, we have specialized training in just about everything, but it's like a working knowledge of. And I was very thankful with all my experiences as a police officer and then coming into the ministry. Anybody I dealt with on the street who had a mental illness or something else, even drug use, I was able to build a rapport with them because of my experience, my background. A lot of the priests go into the priesthood very young, and they don't have that life experience that some of us older folks do. And I mean, I came from a shamanistic background. I walked away from the church altogether for a while. I mean, I'm a honorary member in the vampire community. I know plenty of pagans, witches, bikers. I mean, I've got a pretty good resume for all different kinds of people. And I think it's very important when you try to pastorally counsel someone that you find that common denominator and build on it.
Yeah, and that we're signposts.
Specialized training is so important too.
Yeah, we actually signposts more often than not. And actually, I do know clergy that are qualified, psychoanalysts, psychotherapists.
Yeah.
They do not mix the two.
Yeah.
They do not mix the two, but they know how not to. I mean, that's
right.
Is similar to what you were saying, Amanda, about your practice, that in a way you need a bit of knowledge in order to be able to separate those things out.
Yeah, I could lose my license if I had let's say I have a 25-year-old who comes to my office and starts talking to me about, it could be any religion, right? And they start talking to me about spiritual concerns, and I start telling them very overtly neo-pagan rituals to do. And then let's take the tarot cards, there is room in therapy, to be fair, for tarot or for ritual. Like, a lot of what therapy is ritualizing things. And that's a different interview, talking about the neurobiology of ritual, right? Like that is an aspect. But if I start talking to Odin, I'm sorry, I'm kind of throwing the Norse gods under the bus today, but if I start talking to Odin on
okay, they're cool.
Very inappropriate, right? And I could lose my license if I start taking out my Bible. And yeah, of course I have a Bible, guys. Come on, I've probably read it more times than you have.
I can guarantee. Let me just say, I can vouch for that. I'm sure she is probably. Amanda's more proficient with Christian scripture than I would guarantee. I would say at least 75% of the Roman Catholic Church. I'm not kidding.
But I would never take out my Bible in my office and start reading scripture to a client. Now, if a client comes to me with their Bible and says, this passage gave me strength, or this passage troubled me, my job is to meet them where they are and basically just nod along and go, oh, really? Tell me more about that. That's my job. My job is not to debate theology, give spiritual advice. And what I find is that what pagans don't have is we don't have a licensing board. We don't have consultation. We don't have peer review. I have a therapist and a health coach and a mentor, three witchy mentors. I do consultation. I do supervision. I have a lot of oversight of people who've been doing this a long longer than I have. And I've been doing this for a long time. Pagan clergy don't have that. And I think that really puts us at such a deficiency, is that we don't peer consult. We don't have an oversight for each other. And there's a lot of reasons why. But at the end of the day, we can do a lot of harm for overstepping. Anyway, I want to soapbox. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, I think that was all good information there. And it really definitely leads in. Joy, do you have any other thoughts on that? Because I think you brought up a very good point, and a very important point about the process. And this is, again, a part of the process that I don't think the layperson necessarily sees, you know?
Right. And, and it was one of those things where, I had the pleasure of having both a therapist and a pastoral counselor and seeing the difference in how therapy works. And of course, it's a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's reframing it to try to, get me to see it from a different perspective sort of thing. But you, on the other hand, were trying to connect me to God because I just could not get my way there. I was blocking myself at every turn. I was producing more spirits out of my traumas and not knowing what to do with them. And eventually, I learned how to fight them on my own.
Yeah.
But it was because of the therapy.
Well,
it wasn't as much because of you. Once I got the therapy right, I could see God more clearly, and you helped guide me into the right direction in that perspective.
That's such a brilliant distinction
I
there.
couldn't make it before that.
Right. No, you couldn't. And that's why even back in those days when I don't do pastoral counseling anymore, but when I was offering that as a service, as a pastoral service, I really never would take a long-term client unless they were willing to also have a conventional therapist alongside. And it was for the reason that you just mentioned, that typically when a person comes for spiritual guidance, or what I guess is loosely defined as pastoral counseling, but not being a pastoral therapist or an actual Christian therapist, which is a completely different thing. It's assumed that they're at a point in their own emotional and psychological health that they're ready to start taking on some of the challenges of spiritual development. But if a person's being inhibited by some kind of psychological barrier or emotional issue that has been yet to be resolved, there's nothing that type of spiritual development is going to do for that individual until they've been able to meet with that and work through it. And the pastoral counselor is not there to do that. They're not qualified to do that. That's not the role. You need to go through the conventional channels. And the same thing is true for exorcism ministry. You're not just hunting down demons like it's the Supernatural show. What you're doing is you're working with, ultimately the goal is healing. You want that person to live a more functional life. And if all of the dynamic is not healthy, then even if you've fixed the spiritual issue, it's not going to have much of an impact. And the same thing goes with, even if it is predominantly a spiritual issue, if it is a demonic oppression confirmed, if it is a confirmed demonic possession, if you just heal that, but you don't deal with any of the emotional psychiatric consequences, then you're not going to see the kind of healing that you want to see, and the client's not going to get the resolution that they think they're going to get. The healing has to come holistically. It has to come from every part of the individual that's unhealthy. And almost always, I've never seen it. Actually, I'm not going to say almost. I'm just going to say I've never seen it. I have never seen a person who had a genuine demonic problem, whether it be obsession, possession, oppression, that did not have strong psychiatric emotional consequences that needed to be dealt with.
They've basically been a hostage for however long they've been.
Yeah, it's like Stockholm syndrome a little bit. Yeah.
Right. And so they almost miss that part that's gone because they started to get used to it. And so that they have to be taught how to let that go and rebuild themselves and find themselves again and start to do healthy habits.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Because I think to use, having said that, I don't want to get into pop psychology, but to use the language of deconstruction and reconstruction, because when somebody comes and brings what they're wrestling with, their life as it is, whatever it may be, then oftentimes it's a lot easier to deconstruct that than it is to then reconstruct something. And if all you can, this is a negative person, by the way, somebody who's not nice and is not a friend. all they do is deconstruct. So they want to tear away all of the crutches that are kind of, just holding you up to claw your way through life, Right. And yes, ultimately you don't want to be on those crutches forever, but if you just pull them away, then they're just in a heap on the floor and can't go anywhere. And so, a wicked person deliberately deconstructs with no reconstruction in mind, but also a bungling fool can end up in a situation where they go, oh, what are you doing that for? Throw those things away. Those talismans don't do you any good. Chuck them away, shoot them in the bin. But you're not offering anything else, to help, reconstruct them in a way, and not the way that you want them to be, but in a way that is going to actually help them to be able to walk again. Yeah. And so I think that kind of, my advice to anybody is, if you haven't got something reconstructive in mind, do not try to pull away crutches. Don't try to deconstruct something. This is often why people do come to the church at certain crises in their life, because even a badly run church, at least has a meta narrative that is more than sufficient. I mean, removing God from it, because I'm speaking in deliberately kind of non-spiritual terms here, but it's got such a superstructure that people can in fact be held up by it. It's not enough on its own, but it's better than nothing. And so the thing that really fires me off is where people just go, let's just look superficially from my position to yours and say, oh, those things you're doing aren't going to help you. Let's rip all that away. But you're not actually going to be there sticking around, signposting to people that can help to actually reconstruct that person and build them up again.
Yeah. Amanda, in your work, or I should say in the side of your life that is the priestess side, the spiritual side, do you find that a lot of people come to paganism as a way of life because they are trying to deal with emotional or psychological problems and looking for a crutch to, sort of, I guess, redirect the energy?
I think that is a thing. I have seen that. People come to paganism for lots of different reasons. I was mentioning earlier that people come.
You are currently the only person in this conference.
Whoop, I think we lost Joy.
Sorry, I was hearing voices and had a second.
Right, item 2.
I think it was Loki. Loki was talking to us. That's up.
Yeah. I take it back. There's stuff that neo-paganism allows for that other mainstream religions don't, like a direct experience of magic, speaking to deities one-on-one. I do think Catholicism has ancestor worship, but other Christian denominations don't. And or a sense of ritual, like Catholicism. I mean, you guys know how to do ritual, right? Like you guys do it. But not all Christian religions offer that. Like, I spent some time in the UU church as an intern when I was doing some training, and there's like, they make attempts at ritual, but it's like sweet. This is a sweet attempt, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's fine. Like the UUs are fine. They're doing their thing.
Well, it's normally cafeteria Catholicism, isn't it? It's not some bit of the remnant of the Catholic Church that either they've rediscovered or that they kept all along.
Well, it really is the oldest, ritual system that is in existence from the ancient world. That's continuous. Yeah, because pretty much paganism, ancient paganism was completely wiped out by the converts. They did their best job that they could to eliminate any pagan history. So we don't really have anything from there that's not a reconstruction in some way. Islam's not really ritualistic. It has a certain dynamic that has components that are similar, but it's not in the same sense that there's a liturgical ritual mass or divine liturgy like you see in both Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Judaism had it but lost it. So, I mean, I guess I would assume that some have preserved some of those ancient rituals for the unlikely possibility that the third temple's actually built. But I can't see that happening without the Third World War coming with it. And then what do you have? I mean, after that, you can go to the East and look for like ritual Buddhism that exists with the
Shinto.
You got Shinto, Vajrayana. Hinduism has a certain ritualistic component, and of course, shamanism. But that's not as formal. I mean, Shinto and Vajrayana are pretty formal and ancient, but that's about it. There's not a whole lot else.
Even using the word ritual, I mean, the word ritual is a Latin-based word, and so
that's true.
So of course it's going to be associated with the Catholic Church, and it means river. Of course, it's the same root word. The idea is that a ritual moves you.
The very words for, this is my body, that is said at the words of institution and when the host is consecrated. In Latin, that's where we get the words hocus pocus, because if you say them really quickly, it almost sounds like hocus pocus, and that's exactly where it comes. So it was seen as the foundation to the Western mind's idea of incantation. Comes from the Catholic Mass. People don't really realize that.
Yeah.
And ritual is one of the differences in the. Sorry, Amanda. I'll be very quick. Between the sort of therapeutic approach, which is valid and good, which says, who am I? Why do I think the way I think? Is that healthy? What do I want to keep? What do I want to let go? As opposed to the ritual of penance, confession, and absolution, which is actually about saying, so here's the detritus that I've decided I don't want to continue to have part of who I am, and the ritual then helps that to be pushed and moved along. Therefore, once confessed, it's done. And there's whether that's within the Catholic Church where a priest gives absolution, and therefore, if they come back to you confessing the same sins, you say, they're done, they're finished, they're no longer to be discussed, or whether it's in Shinto where they write them down on a piece of paper and set fire to them, whatever it may be, the ritual is the end, it is the disposal of the trash. Whereas the therapeutic process, even if it's a kind of if it's not formal therapy, if it's a spiritual kind of direction, that it is about identifying what that trash may be, and also what's good to be kept as well.
Well, I feel like neo-pagan rituals definitely have room for both, of doing a lot of self-exploration, exploring the shadow, and kind of in the Jungian sense. But also, like, we have rituals for like all stages of the human existence, of like birthing something, of like if we follow the neo-pagan wheel of the year, which is a seasonal agricultural calendar kind of mushed with an astrological, like celestial calendar. But it's all about cycles, right? And humans live those cycles every year, 365 days, but also just like in our daily lives, we live these cycles. And neo-paganism kind of helps us. What I think one of the benefits is we ritualize beginnings and endings, which is really good for the human psyche. We like to have we're very insecure little mammals. We like to have clear beginnings and clear endings, and we're really good at ritualizing that. People come to this religion and these paths and these practices for that direct experience of I can craft a ritual for this work I'm trying to do, or even just having a place to go. And if your dear beloved grandmother speaks to you and you're at cocktail hour, telling coworkers, like, that's not a safe place, right? Like, that might jeopardize your professional reputation. If you're at a meet and greet or a heathen pub moot, if you talk about grandma, like, everyone's talking to their grandmas in theory, if you're doing good ancestor worship. And so, like, your question, Bryan, was like, people coming to this because they're missing something.
Well, it's that's what we see a lot in the church. I find that a lot of people only really start getting serious about their faith when they're in some kind of crisis that sort of inspires them to either rediscover it or start looking for it. But unfortunately, it's rare that someone seeks it because they're truly enriched spiritually, and they want a means to be able to facilitate that. I've just wondered if in paganism, if the same phenomena exists as being a product of the human psyche, and it's just it sort of like transcends all ways and practices, or if it's just a unique thing that we're seeing with the Christian church today.
When I was interning at the U Church, I did a lot of study on like what was bringing people in and out of churches. And you guys had spoken to people go to churches when there's a need, right? Mm-hmm. When there's a need, when there's a spiritual crisis, or like people really go to churches when they have babies. Because they want community.
And when they die.
And when they die. When it's too late.
But when people come to neo-paganism, what they say is it's like coming home. And I have experienced that for myself. I have heard that over and over and over again. It's like coming home. And so I don't know if Christians, I'm sure Christians do say that, because when you find where your soul belongs or your religious family or whatever, like that is feeling like a homecoming. But I think for neo-pagans, I feel like there's something energetic going there. Whatever archetypes a person has in their life.
I actually think it's not the same in the church. I think you've hit on something here. Mm-hmm. I think that I think I would say that when I say the church, I mean going to the mass. I don't mean sitting in a building drinking coffee, but I think going to the mass is actually almost for the Catholic. It's not about going home. It's about going to a glimpse of what God's home is like. In other words, it does feel alien to us because we're not yet prepared for heaven. And so we get a glimpse of what it will be to be in heaven, but actually we don't feel at home. So I think it's a different focus because the church is saying, no, where you are is where we accept you. I say the church. As I would say, God is saying, yes, I accept you where you are. There's a terrible, terrible hymn. It's called Come As You Are. It goes, come as you are, that's how I want you. Well, no. Come as you are, that's how God accepts us. Yeah. But that's not how he wants us. He wants us to be perfect. That hymn is actually totally wrong. It is. And so
it's like Mary, did you know that awful Christmas song? Oh no! It's of course she knew. Yeah. Did you not read the gospel?
Well, I think Gabriel gave her a clue. But I actually think that is actually a fundamental difference between what you practice and what the church ought to practice, which is to say, no, you shouldn't feel at home. It's why we make ourselves uncomfortable at church. We kneel or we stand, or I think that is a difference that you've highlighted. So I think I'm interested in that.
So kind of to bounce off of what you're saying, in Northern myths and like heathen practices, I'm not a heathen. I don't know why I'm talking about them so much.
It's a very popular discipline right now, and something all of us have a little bit of knowledge in. So carry on with it.
Hey, if you're gonna get like a whole vat of meat and some roast, like some meat on the bone, good. I'm there. So if that makes me a heathen, then call me a heathen. I'm good.
So I had a heathen explain to me. He's like, we are heathens because we're people of the heath. We're people of the earth. And what he said was, when we die, we need a little esoteric here. Like a lot of pagan beliefs and a lot of like mystic religions feel like we have different parts of our souls or our spirits, whatever you want to call it. But they say, in this worldview, that when you die, part of you goes back to the tribe. It goes back to the heath. It goes back to the earth. You go home, right? Like I have with my initiations, I have some like really powerful like lineage stuff where I've had like visions and these experiences of like, I am part of a lineage of magical folks, priests and priestesses and witches who came before me that I'm part of. I am initiated I'm always going to be part of that lineage now. When I die, those little pieces, those aggregate structures, as Bryan might say, like, are going to find ways to come back together in a certain form in certain people, as they have done with me, right? Like, and so for a pagan to say it's like coming home, I really wonder energetically, is it because there are parts of you that have done these rituals, have done these aspects? Like, I have a friend who's a Gardnerian high priestess who has joked that Wicca is a resurrection cult, I think is what she called it. I am not a Gardnerian high priestess. I have dabbled in Wicca, but I'm not like the woo-woo original lineage. I cannot trace my upline, right? Mm-hmm. But when she told me that, I was like, aha, that's the thing that makes you different from me, is if you're a resurrection or a rebirth or reincarnation cult, that basically means you're doing rituals to ensure that parts of you come back and come back and come back and come back. That's what I suspect. Yeah. I don't know. I have those secrets. I was not given that initiation. Yeah. But I wonder with heathens, if part of your soul has to go back to the tribe, of course, that's going to feel like home. That is your tribe. That is your blood, and that is your spirit. And I know from my experiences being initiated, I have felt like pieces of me came together. And I don't know if they were there the whole time, or if I feel like it was both. It was there the whole time, where it came to me, and I'm forever changed. I can't undo this stuff that I've done.
Well, I mean, I wonder also, to be a little bit perhaps less esoteric, which I guess is a bit of a stretch for me, but, I wonder sometimes if it's not actually built into our DNA, and that's what some of these individuals are responding to. That I mean, I know that Carl Jung and his collective unconscious also saw it in. I mean, I guess the more metaphysical side would be like the Akashic records, but I mean, there was also a very almost materialistic side to how Jung looked at the collective unconscious, and we would even say that those archetypes that make up the world of the collective unconscious are literally in the DNA. That's why you would see pyramids in both, Egypt and also across the world, where there was no interaction between the Egyptians and what is now South America, the natives that lived there at the time.
But Carl Jung's collective unconscious is inseparable from his underpinning Christian mindset.
Yeah, it is.
And so, I mean, this is where there is similarity between, because there should be, because there's only one God, and therefore people simply reflect him differently, but it's the same God. And
I want to come back to that. So I'll finish your thought, but I want to come back to what you just said there.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, therefore, necessarily, human nature reflects that. And it doesn't, yes, many things are culturally specific, and it's those cultures that shift and change those things. But I think this idea of the collective unconscious is referring to Carl Jung, is to say, well, Carl Jung says, well, there's one God and creator of all things, and therefore that underpins this idea that we would have a collective unconscious.
Yes. And Amanda, I'd like to actually kind of expand a little bit about what, Father Chris just said, because I mean, as a monotheist, and monotheism as a practice, as a philosophy, is sort of central to the Judeo-Christian worldview. And actually all three of the Abrahamic religions would agree on that principle. In fact, one of the things that Islam hates the most about Christianity is they find that the Trinity is a little bit too polytheistic for their taste. They don't really understand the theology of it. They don't like the idea of this mystery. And so there's a lot of criticism in Islam about that, saying that, no, that was basically, a bastardization of the truth. So here's, Islam, here's the Quran, we're going to correct it. But outside of that, I've always felt that there really isn't a conflict between polytheism and monotheism. I think it's a perspective issue. And I think Father Chris was kind of going in that direction. I want to get your opinion as a polytheist, or someone that identifies as a polytheist and lives a worldview that is polytheistic. I'd like your opinion on this, and because this is something that I teach. when I'm discussing these matters esoterically. But I've always found that Hinduism did the best job in terms of how it deals with bridging the gap between monotheism and polytheism. People think of Hinduism as a polytheistic religion. Reality, it's not. It has that component because it understands that there are emanations, sort of like in Gnosticism. There are emanations of this higher, almost unknowable reality that I guess you could say is the Father. In Christian terms, you would say that this is that. Why we need Jesus is because we are so dissimilar from the Father that we need an aspect of God that we can relate to in order to connect with that aspect of God that is so far beyond us. In Hinduism, there's Brahman that sort of fulfills that role. And then we, all human beings, are Atman, which is sort of an extension of that. But Brahman is made up. That's really the only true reality. It's the fullness of everything divine, and for all intents and purposes, it's God. But Brahman is made up of countless things. Predominantly, its primary three emanations, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, which all take on the three primary aspects of the divine: creation, preservation, and destruction. And then out of there, that I guess holy trinity of the Hindu religion, then there's like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of deities that sort of extend or emanate out from that reality. And then Atman, all the Atman, which is us, are basically contain that reality all within us, which is where we can connect to these individual aspects that are unique. So when I teach people about, do the pagan gods exist, or are they a myth? How does a monotheist reconcile the ancient pagan worldview of there being multiple gods? And the way I explain it is this way. I'm curious your thoughts on this. It's okay if you disagree. I'm curious to see what you would say. My opinion is that what the pagans were connecting with the ancient pagans, today it might be a little bit different because, again, a lot of it's reconstructed. But what I think they were trying to connect with, in my opinion, was the energies of God. The various differentiations in which God connects with us. So for those wrathful moments, then we get, obviously Mars. For those moments where we connect with love, and, obviously then it's like Venus or Aphrodite, or, and for all these other different aspects of human experience governed by a different deity, and it's God's action in that moment that's being worshipped. And I've always felt that what the Jews were objecting to, and why there was so much tension between the ancient Jews and the ancient pagans, is because they saw that as a type of blasphemy in terms of an idolatry when you're worshiping the things that God does instead of the true God. So let's focus on the true God, which cannot be seen, cannot be defined or identified in any way, which is why they had the pillar that was empty. But do you think there's some connection there? Is there a way to use that information to sort of bridge the gap so that there isn't this great chasm between Christians and pagans that I don't think is necessary at all? I think Hinduism helps to maybe give us a formula for that. But I'm just curious, from your perspective, what do you think about that, and what could you add to that?
Oh my gosh. I don't know why you're hitting me with this one. Everything I say is off. Okay.
No pressure.
Pagans, we love to, I say I don't. This is kind of like the hot topic of, are you a polytheist? Are you a hard polytheist? Are you a soft polytheist? Are you a pantheist? Are you a panentheist? I personally don't care. I don't care.
It doesn't matter, right?
Most of my life, I saw there's this one unknowable oneness, this Godhead, capital G Godhead, and then we have emanations. A lot of pagans like to use the idea of there's a gemstone with many facets, and which facet are you going to look at? I had some experiences in the past few years, like way after our work together on esoteric mysticism, that made me kind of be okay calling myself a polytheist. If you ask other pagan polytheists if I'm a polytheist, they would tell you no, because they're very gatekeeping and I don't pass the purity test. I call myself a polytheist because I have personal experiences with individual deities or entities or spirits. To me, they are gods because I worship them. But I also interact with spirits who are not gods, and I don't worship them. I do other things with them.
Yeah.
And for me, it's both and. Is light a particle or a wave? How are we observing it? My cop-out answer is, I don't care. Like, functionally, I know what I do as a high priestess. And sometimes it is archetypal goddess or god, the Lord and Lady, as the Wiccans might say. Sometimes it's a specific deity who I name. And then sometimes when I pray, it's like, Monty Python, oh God, you are so big. It's really, really cool down here. You're doing great things. Like, it really depends. For me, it's a matter of function. And I think that's a cop-out answer. But I have learned through this work that I cannot say, I don't know. I'm a human. My brain can only handle so much. There have been many, many wise men and women who have debated this for literally thousands of years. The ancient Greeks debated this. I'm pretty sure the ancient Egyptians did too. We just don't have that writing.
Right.
Well, I think it's implied because you had a monotheistic period that became sort of they tried to erase it. Yeah. So clearly it had to have been an issue if that happened at all. I mean, and we know it did. So I mean, yeah, I think the Egyptians definitely would have been all over that at some point.
I think that, I mean, going back to, you made reference to the polytheistic world and the ancient Israelites. I think, instinctively polytheism is more instinctively, it makes sense to me, certainly. There's a god of the wind and there's a god of the river and there's, all these things. It's in a sense, especially in a pre-scientific world, but even in a post-scientific world, it would be in many ways easier to believe in separate gods for separate purposes. I think. I mean, it's interesting that in the commandments is thou shalt have no other gods before me. Mm-hmm, yeah. In other words, so I think Amanda, you partly hit the nail on the head. Where Christianity is in absolute opposition to paganism is to say, well, you can't worship those lower gods, whatever they may or may not be, because the difference is for the ancient Israelites and therefore for the Christians that followed them, that the uniqueness of monotheism is a revelation of God. In other words, that God, Jews and Christians believe, and Muslims, that God has revealed his oneness. And that's a matter of faith. I mean, that's the choice that you make if you want to be a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim, or there are some other, of course, religions that are monotheistic. But monotheism is, in fact, I can see why the default option would be polytheism, because it seems instinctively more accessible.
Well, it's also, Amanda touched on function. It's like there's a functionality there that sort of has some role to play in terms of how this works. And I can say, like, here I am, a Christian. I'm not the typical Christian. I mean, I've been around. I've tried different things, but right now, and I've settled in my Christianity for a long time. I've been a Christian for a long time, and exclusively a Christian for a long time. But in that long time, I still had experiences that would have fallen outside of the context of that religion. And for example,
me as well.
one day, I mean, I was I'll never forget it. Amanda knows this story. She might not know exactly what I'm about to say, but she'll recognize it, I think, when I mention it. I saw Hecate. I did. And I mean, you would think that because there's such a similarity she appeared to me in a very glorious way, and interacted with me, and returned several times. And it was every bit as much of a profound spiritual experience as any Christian oriented one that I had, to the point that you would think that a person that was so involved in the church as I am would have maybe mistaken her as the Virgin Mary, because she looks very similar in her manifestations, the way that even when you see her in depicted form or when you have a vision, it could go either, but it was very distinctively not the Virgin Mary. It was absolutely in every possible way Hecate. And it was a very moving and profound experience that I would think if any other Christian had that, they wouldn't have known what to do with that information, but probably would have scared the shit out of them. But overall, the what I'm trying to get at with this is that maybe what draws some to connect with God on that kind of polytheistic level is that there are encounters with the divine that seem to transcend our preconceptions to such a degree that we can't categorize them the way that we like to and make it neat and compact into a way that says, well, this is the perfect worldview and this is how it's going to fit and we can't go outside that box. I think God's always kind of pushing us outside the box to try to upset things and move things. It's kind of like that Far Side where, God's like mixing up the world and then he's got like this salt shaker in his hand, and on the salt shaker it's labeled jerks, and he says just for fun. It's kind of like that. I think God kind of throws different things into the mix, into our own lives, into our interactions with him, to kind of see what we do with the information. But as a Christian and as someone who's very happily Christian, no desire to move outside of that worldview as far as a life practice, I can perfectly understand why someone would pursue a polytheistic worldview, because there is something very beautiful and special and unique about interacting with these specific aspects of the divine that I guess a pagan would say is one of the gods. But every bit as divine as any kind of experience I've ever had as a Christian, and any kind of mystical experience I've had as a Christian. And maybe that's the defining moment for me, which has led me to this work and to be kind of this out there bishop that's more esoteric and not dogmatic. I wonder sometimes if that's not, part of the overall, I guess the overall dynamic. So
see, I'm with you on that, because I've had experiences in nature when I was studying shamanism, things that would happen in nature. I would see things, feel things, that if I were to go to my church at the time, they would just completely dismiss it. But I know it was real. I felt it. And when I talk to my pagan friends about it, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's so and so, blah 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 blah." I talk to them, and and you feel more open to discuss these extraordinary experiences that you can have when you do tune into the divine. Yeah. And I still, to this day, any extraordinary experience I've had, other than my near-death experience with St. Michael, any other extraordinary experience was in nature. And so you can't, my church that I grew up in, they wouldn't even entertain that experience. Well, see,
the issue, I think, that for Christians, and I think this is the biggest drawback to it, is this notion that's been built into the religion that the devil is going to trick you. He's smarter than you.
Right.
But
it wasn't the devil.
And these are deceptions. And so if I were to tell if I were to go to Amanda's Baptist minister from all those years ago and say, I saw Hecate, he would, I guarantee you, tell me that this was Satan trying to deceive me, trying to lead me away from the truth. And nothing.
The problem is it could be.
Yes,
I'm not saying
it
was. I'm just saying that's the risk. And so for the Christian, having accepted a kind of the Trinity and the truths of the resurrection, or rather the truth of the resurrection, if you've accepted that, then actually it's not worth the risk.
Yeah.
So I'm not, I sound like I'm actually trying to create a barrier. I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm saying that these things can in fact be inspiring and but I understand also why partly the answer from the church would be very nice, but it's not what matters the most. So if an experience of in nature for a Christian is, I've had this wonderful experience in nature, that's great. That's a blessing. That's a gift. It can be whatever it is. I think where you would come up against problems is if you then turned around and said, okay, so now let's build an altar to this tree where I had this experience and worship that tree as though it were a god. I think that would be pagan as opposed to Christian. But that's not to invalidate the experience.
No, it's just as simple. It's an experience of the divine, God's creation.
It's what you do with your will.
He created it all, and it's kind of a little glimpse of see what I've done.
Yeah.
And you realize how beautiful it is when you have these experiences. When you have animals come out of nowhere and walk right up to you as if you're a best friend. You know, animals teach you these things. They're innocent. They're very honorable creatures that were created by the divine. And when you
it's
can
a
have
glimpse of what Eden was like.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean,
it's almost like being in the garden.
And that's the thing. It's like there's a dimension to it that is good and is wonderful and is beautiful. And I mean, having been someone like myself who, you know, works with evil in some ways, I almost work with evil more than I work with good, even though that's not technically true, because I mean, I wouldn't be able to work with evil if I wasn't already immersed in everything that is good. You know, because it's really Christ is the exorcist. I'm just the facilitation of that grace. But you know, I'm not nothing more. But at the same time, though, I do experience it, you know, and so I'm very familiar with evil. I recognize evil. I understand evil. I know it more intimately than most people. And to the point that it doesn't really have the means to hide from me at this point. It's sort of like, okay, well, it's the old game. I mean, there's no more mystery. So the fact that these encounters occur, there would be no deception. And yet there is this beautiful interaction that's occurring, kind of like what Sister Mary Joan's referring to, that I find value in. So I do completely agree in the sense for a Christian who's accepted the Christian life and worldview as their own. Well, it's not worth the risk, you know, because most people are not going to have the ability to discern it well and maybe not be able to tell the difference. And so this kind of awareness is probably not for them. And I would actually argue it probably might not even come to them for that reason. But at the same time, to Amanda's credit and to the credit of the worldview in which she has adopted and lives within, I totally get it. And I think sometimes, you know, as Christians, we see this as, oh, these are the people that left the church. You know, they it's a type of solipsism where they just went off and, you know, all they care about is what, you know, it's an egocentric decision. And it's not. It's every bit the same inspiration that brings many of us, hopefully, maybe even more so, because like that's why I asked the question earlier about whether or not she sees the motivation for joining a pagan community to be the same thing that we see, because what I see often are people coming here out of distress and not necessarily out of love for God. The love might come later, and I guess it's better than nothing, but at the same time, I really wish people didn't just save the church for when their life's in crisis. I wish people would, you know, maybe your life wouldn't ever be in crisis if you came to the church when things were good. And I was wondering if the pagan community experiences that in the same way, but there's also different motivations. I think we've touched on that, but I can understand why those motivations exist, because there is something beautiful. And I can say there's a longing there. I would say my own interactions with those deities, I guess you could say, I mean, I don't worship them, but I've interacted with them, it has been a wonderful experience, something that I don't expect most Christians to even begin to understand. But I would totally say why. I totally understand why a person would want to immerse themselves with that, because
spiritual maturity comes into play right there. If you're not prepared for it, then you don't need to even try to connect.
I think so.
I agree totally. I still have a strong pull toward shamanism, but I've learned through the years with you being an esoteric Catholic, they don't have to be opposing. I actually intertwine them beautifully. I don't practice any shamanism anymore, but I do spend a lot of time in nature. That's my place to go.
Well, they never have been separated. If you look at the Irish Catholic Church, which in the previous broadcast I've been quite harsh on, but actually, one of my Irish grandmother, I've just put it in the chat. She definitely believed in fairies at the bottom of the garden, you know, and that is a very widely held belief in Ireland, a very deeply Catholic country until recent times, and that's for different reasons. But the idea of there's so many holy wells throughout the British Isles, not just in Ireland. I mean, people forget England was Celtic too, but the holy wells are seen as kind of entry into the underworld and the land of Tír na Nog, and these things aren't eschewed. They're not, they're taught in Ireland, and they're taught. People are just as happy to speak about, priests in church are just as happy to speak about these things, not as the antithesis to Christianity, but actually just part of life. So, I do want to be balanced, saying that on the one hand, it cannot be worth the risk for people if they can't distinguish between created order, creations, and the creator, as far as a Christian is concerned. Yeah. But at the other hand, it's perfectly okay to embrace the things, that in Hamlet, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt up in your philosophies. I think it is about balance. We've gone over actually a half hour. I don't know if you have time for a few more questions, Amanda. Do you? I don't know. A
few more, because it's hard for me to. But I have like a 45-minute drive home.
Oh my goodness! Well, then let me just give you one short question. Hopefully, you can provide a short answer, and then we'll close it up. But I'm just curious. Don't have to go into terrible detail, but I'm just curious. As a pagan doing metaphysical work, have you encountered genuinely evil entities that could only be defined at least in Judeo-Christian terms as a demon, or do you have another explanation for that characteristic?
That's a good question. I don't think I personally have encountered anything I would say was truly meant to say that. I have, the person who I was speaking about earlier, who I sent you the video, I think that if I were to trust my gut, I would say that was definitely not that creature. This person thought they were possessed by Lilith. They were not possessed by Lilith. I think that was something evil and bad, probably a demon or something similar. I don't know. I'm not versed in that, but when I saw it, my stomach turned. And I would say that's probably was something demonic. I have a very good friend who, I'm going to tell a quick story really fast, who had a psychotic break when they were like 19 or 20. So when schizophrenia kind of onsets, it tends to be older adolescents, especially in males. And it was one of those cases where in his mind, an angel came to me and to him, and she was beautiful and his soulmate. And she said, okay, well, you have to join me. And so to do that, you have to kill yourself. Right. Mm-hmm. And he tried to kill himself a number of times, was hospitalized, was finally stabilized. The way he explains it to me is he said, that was a demon. An angel would never say that. God would never say it. Soulmate would never say that. For my friend, he saw this as a shamanic initiation that he failed, because in more indigenous cultures or in traditional shamanism, like Northern European, Russian shamanism, when you had someone who would have that, what I as a clinician would call a psychotic break, a schizophrenic episode, psychosis, delusions, mania, in these cultures, you would have an older, wiser medicine person or shaman or priest or priestess or medicine, whatever you want to call them, an older person who had the same experience, who recognizes it and said, this is a mystic, this is a shaman, this is our next healer of the tribe. And so rather than pumping them full of medication and putting them in a hospital and basically ruining their lives, and I don't want to be fatalistic, but like schizophrenia will fuck your life up. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, it is bad.
Yeah, we've seen it.
Yeah. And it's sad.
Oh yeah.
And so cultures where you have someone who had this episode, they have that lived experience, they had a teacher come in and train them so they can deal with the demons literally and figuratively. And so I have friends, and I've heard this story from others who have family members who had, in our Western world, had a psychotic episode in a break. In indigenous cultures and traditional, like more pagan cultures, like more earthy, tribal, like Neolithic cultures would have seen that as this person has been chosen as a holy person. So I'm going to train them and teach them and give them the tools to deal with the demons, literally and figuratively. And when my friend told me, this is my failed shamanic initiation, it was devastating because they knew, mm-hmm. had this been in a different culture, in a society, in a different religion, a different whatever, that someone would have been there to see that and train them so they could use their gifts. There's no training. And there's a lot of books written about this, kind of the intersection between mental health and shamanism, and like more indigenous healing of like, and when I have worked with people who, not that I work with a lot of psychotic patients, because I'm not really equipped for that energetically and emotionally to deal with that. But it's devastating to think that, like, had we had more people who can recognize this as a spiritual illness, and yeah, like we can observe schizophrenia in the brain, but who's not to say that the brain doing something doesn't make one more open for spirit communication, right?
Well, it's like the DSM, right? You have the 5 axes, right, of assessment. My professor, my abnormal psychology professor in undergraduate school used to argue. I used to argue with her back because back then I wasn't very spiritual or religious. But she used to argue that there should be a 6 axis in the DSM. And I said, well, why do we need 5? Why do we need a 6th one? What is that going to do? She says we need one for psycho-spiritual issues.
Yes, absolutely. And she was right.
And I didn't, I said, come on. I said, we're trying to get out of the superstition of psychoanalysis and become a true science. We're never going to get there with that. I was very arrogant. Now, having worked all these years later, she was absolutely right. It needs that. And it still does. It doesn't have it yet.
Well, think about your own gifts, Bryan. And I don't want to dig into your personal stuff, but I know stories that you've told me over the years. What would happen if you had an elder in the community or a wise person in the community who knew the things you were seeing and experiencing and was able to guide you in that? Like, imagine being, maybe you don't have to imagine, but imagine being a 5-year-old who sees dead people, right? Mm-hmm. Super scary. You scare your parents when you admit to that. If you have an elder in the community who's like, okay, this person is gifted. How can I foster these gifts? That would be a huge asset.
And there are so few opportunities or areas in the church where that is the case. One of the exceptions, of course, is exorcism.
Yes,
it's one of the only remaining kind of master apprentice, passing on of knowledge, and I mean. Because I was
it's really the only way it's done. They have these classes at the Vatican, but it's not really the way it's actually taught.
Yeah, they're useful, and you also need a mentor. But
you do.
But I was a bit hard on paganism earlier. I want to be hard on the church just for the sake of balance. Okay, and so
we're okay with that here.
Yeah, okay. Well, I want to tell you an experience, and this was when I was an Anglican, of the installation of a bishop in the Anglican Church. I won't say where, although anyone that knows me will know. But and this person that was going to be installed, he was already ordained a bishop, but was going to be installed as a bishop, had spent a lot of time amongst Aboriginal indigenous communities in the Northern Territory in Australia, and had a heart for them, and that's a good thing. So that's the good thing. But at his installation ritual, it began with an Aboriginal smoking ceremony outside the church. And then it had some kind of reference to a god or a name for God, which was not Christian, which was indigenous. And of course, from a particular indigenous, there's no such thing as Aboriginal spirituality. There's spiritualities. Now, I vociferously objected to that. And it's interesting. The church can be so bad at dealing with this in the name of wanting to be kind of inclusive or, to buck against the sort of rejection trend. It went too far the other way. And I think that Christians fall into two categories on this. They either think, oh, well, it doesn't do any harm. It's just kind of a sort of, a pre-Christian, pre-enlightened, to use an unfortunate term, way, and we're just going to bring it into what we do. Well, actually, I don't agree with that. You see, I think these are real spiritual realities. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason they should not be used within a different religion. Yeah. In other words, it's not just inappropriate in a kind of politically correct sense or, in churchiology, but it's actually wrong, because these things are not made up; they're real. And so, on the one hand, I'm having to go at the church by saying you're not realizing that these things are real spiritual entities that exist, and you shouldn't be dabbling with it. Yeah. And I will say that I was next to another bishop, and again, I won't say who leant over to me during the ritual and said, "Which pagan goddess are we worshipping?" and I think, and in a way, it was a joke, but that told a deep truth, which is to say, we are confusing principles here, and that's not helpful.
No, you don't cross. Remember in Ghostbusters, don't cross the streams.
Don't cross the streams.
There's some truth to that. Well, Amanda, I just want to give you a moment to tell the audience how they can find you. If there's something if you've got blogs or something that you'd like to promote, by all means, the floor is yours.
Wow, this has been so much fun, and it's been amazing, and I've missed this, and this has been wonderful. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for all the folks on YouTube. I've been watching the comments, and it's just been really fun to have that interaction.
Thank you for coming on. We definitely need to have you.
Yeah, I want you back. I mean, I would love it for you to be. I'd be honored if you'd be a regular guest coming on, and we'll talk about different topics. And there's so many things that we could do, but I mean, there's really no limit to the amount of conversation we can have. So, I mean, honestly, that's how we did the old show, and I mean, I'd love to kind of integrate some of that into this new one. So we'd love to have you back.
I would love that. I mean, so to bring it back to the idea of like paganism and spiritual illness, just drink enough water, eat enough protein, put your cell phone down every once in a while, get outside, be barefoot sometimes. Like, it's not
do some grounding. Yes.
Yeah. It's not that hard to just take care of yourself in like really easy ways. Like, just drink some water. And I'm not saying it's going to cure depression, but it's going to help you manage depression, anxiety. Anyway, you can find me. Twitter's probably the easiest. I have like a dead blog and all those things. I'm Word Morris, WORDMORRIS. And I look at Twitter. Sometimes it hooks up to Tumblr and an Instagram, but like I'm not really good at the social media thing these days. Because it's a wretched hive of scum and villainy. I don't know how y'all put up with it. Awful.
Well, that's why I was like, I mean, come on. If we're talking about Amanda, I shouldn't have even asked you the question. Have you ever come across evil? You're on Twitter, so naturally the answer was yes to that.
You're right. Yeah. Oh no.
The banality of evil is Twitter.
As a therapist who works with teenagers, I have gazed into the eyes of evil, and it is TikTok.
Oh yeah! Oh my God! I agree with that.
Talk about.
I agree with
on that.
I hate that app so much.
It's 3 hours later, like, oh my God! No wonder I've got to pee. Yeah,
I'm really proud of saying I've never gone on it.
Don't.
And I never will.
Don't do it. It's a trap.
Oh my God! Yes.
And I'm open for any questions. My policy is, if I don't know, I love referring people out. I will not give mental health advice unless you are paying me money in the state of North Carolina.
In an official capacity.
Yes. But like I do, I can answer questions. I can point you in the right direction. I know it's hard for pagans to find therapists. I can offer reassurance and guidance, kind of like the realm of pastoral counseling that we were talking about earlier. Like, I can do that, and I will do that for people. I'm not your therapist. I'm just going to tell you to drink water and call your insurance or whatever. But yeah, message me on Word Morris. Every once in a while, I poke into Bryan's feed. It's usually when someone says you're fake, and I'm like, here's the picture of us together. 5 minutes after the laying of hands. So yeah, this has been a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll definitely talk about future episodes. I'd love to have you on.
Be awesome.
Again, very soon. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for listening tonight. I mean, honestly, what a fantastic show this has been. And I really can't thank Amanda enough, and Father Chris and Sister Mary Joan for spending the time with us, for 2.5 hours, a little more than that, actually. So you got another bonus. But we'll be back next week. It's going to be Father Chris, Sister Mary Joan, and myself. We'll be doing open lines, open topics. So really, we want to hear from you. Call into the show, ask your questions in the chat room. If you didn't get your question answered tonight, well, next week, okay? That's Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Same place. Well, same places. We're everywhere now. Take care. God bless everyone.